This podcast, Strange, Rare, and Peculiar, is for kind of those in the know about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, bringing you more information about what you need to know and maybe what you can leave aside about homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
And we're off. We're running. It's good morning, good evening, and good afternoon.
Here we are. Here we are again.
Hello, you.
Hello, you. I'm having my first coffee.
Uh-huh.
And it's a really good one.
Has it got some superfood mud?
Of course. I've got a mushroom coffee. It's a mix of a really strong decaf French roast and then mushroom coffee.
We should have a conversation at some point about Harleman's aphorism 260.
The footnote to 260.
And what's available today. That's, those medicinal things.
We did do that. We already did that.
Yeah, but not in the context of, mud.
Oh, you mean substitutes?
Yeah. The kinds of things that I, find you, the powders and the things that I find you putting in your food. All the potions.
All the potions. That's what's keeping you going. Nobody would guess you were 84 years old.
I'm having my chai. Delicious.
Yum.
Anyway, so I want to talk to you because I think last time we spoke, we talked about the submission of your thesis.
Yeah.
And straight after that, within a hot minute, we were flying off to the JAHC conference, and so I want to hear what you've because one's for the Muggles and one's not. And
I got to present my thesis, taking the Muggle lens off, so that I could, really talk about what it means for homeopathy, which was amazing. Can we talk about just the conference experience first, and then we'll talk about that content?
Sure.
Just a couple of things. First of all, for me personally, I think my adrenals are still regulating after months of just pushing it. I am not a sleeping in person, and I've slept in 2 times until 8 o'clock since I've been back. That's...
Quel horreur.
I know. Maybe it wasn't 8 o'clock, but it was close.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Yeah. I didn't even do that when I was a teenager. That's just not my bio clock. But I think part of it with the conference is there's so much energy. It's amazing. It was amazing to meet people who listen to our podcast. I was like, wow, it's you.
Hi, folks.
Right. Thank you for that. We totally appreciate it. But it was, there's something about being in a place where everyone is there because they love homeopathy and they believe in It's not so much that they love it. They believe in homeopathy and are in some way committed to its furtherance. People might disagree on how they do that, and that's subject for discussion or no discussion. But at the end of the day, it is really important. And I think it's like being at Hogwarts, where you would go, oh, I don't have to pretend anything. I just let my homeo roar. I could just be who I am. I mean, there is really...
I can put on my outfit.
Oh, the outfits are always good, and the dancing is always good. But there is something about it that the conversations are very serious about what do we do to really further this modality in the United States. I just want to acknowledge that. I mean, I think it's really important to kick off by saying that. I find that to be incredibly inspiring. You don't have anything to say to that? You're just looking at me. Did you go to your happy place? You're watching cricket in your head, weren't you?
No, I wasn't actually. I was thinking about what you just... I wasn't. I was surprised that that's where you've gone early in our conversation.
I just think that is something that stays with me. Also, I mean, it is...
how do we grow this thing?
Which thing?
Homeopathy in the United States?
What are you talking about?
Is it... That's what you just said, right?
No, but, well, I guess I did in a way.
You did.
I mean, but not directly. That's not... It is about that, but it is also... I think it's less than... I guess I'm not really even talking about an ask, because everybody's there sort of has a mission in some way.
Right.
they might just be there in support. It might be someone who's a student who says, I'm just learning about this, but I'm committed. I think what I'm acknowledging is the energy of commitment
Totally.
that people bring to the table.
Yep, 100%.
That. And people are there are tensions because people are trying to figure out how to pull things forward. Right? There is that. But there's also this incredible love. I mean, there were some surprises of people that I can't believe I didn't see for an entire year, who I just love hanging out with. You know, the first day is all the screaming and hugging, and you just can't believe you get to be around a person. And so many people that I really just think are amazing that I got to spend 3 minutes talking to in the hallway. But sort of, you're there, you're busy, we were in meetings a lot. I mean, I was in meetings a ton, everything from board meetings to association meetings to, meetings with individual people that I needed to be face to face with and, go for a walk with or sit somewhere quietly with, like that kind of thing. It's very, very busy. Right? You were at the booth a lot of the time. What was your experience like?
Just that and more. And it's really interesting because here's what I do love. I really love meeting our students.
Yeah.
Who's, and that's just a joy because we see them so often.
In their Zoom
daily,
square.
But in their Zoom square. And so, that was hilarious.
Oh my gosh, we had so much fun.
And then, of course, there's other folks like, who are you? Like, no idea who we are. I am. And so I find it really interesting to go about describing, say, myself or AHE or Home Foundation.
Yeah.
And, I find myself thinking as I'm talking, going, that sounded really weird. Or, gee, what a really good description of who it is that we are. So there's that, and then there's the folks that we've known 1,000 years, like Dana. I was like,
Dana Ullman.
Oh my God,
who is just fun to hang out with, full of trivia and information, and pretty hilarious.
Well, I mean, and then the opposite of trivia as well. So some really, really solid and important information.
Oh yeah.
But just that was great. To see him and some of the other folks that have been around for a long time.
Bill Shevin gave a talk that was really important. Bill Shevin is the president of the HBCUS, and he gave a talk about sort of where we are and what we need to do. It was incredibly compelling. I really appreciated that, and this whole idea of the Friends of the Pharmacopoeia and how through his leadership, they are bringing more transparency through to that process of how the homeopathic remedies make it through to sort of that approval process and the challenges that they face, which is a really different conversation than the sort of grassroots amazing work that gets done through Americans for Homeopathy Choice.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Right? But it's two sides of the same coin. I mean, that's another thing about it. And I think this, for people who haven't attended a Joint American Homeopathy Conference, it is, it's a few days, it's 3 days. Sometimes there's pre-conference and post-conference activity, but mostly it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday with, various speakers. And then there are social events. There's a welcome drinks thing that happens, and then there's a dinner and dancing and awards, and there's a breakfast. So there are lots of opportunities for people to sort of not leave and go off on their merry way. And then there are lots of opportunities for people to leave and go on their merry way. Like my favorite night is the Thursday night. It's when everybody arrives before the Friday conference really begins. And that's when we usually host an impromptu dinner with our friends and students and, and colleagues. And we must have had 18 people at a table, long table.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, because it kept growing. So the conference, if we haven't said so, was in San Antonio on the Riverwalk. In a hotel that faced the Riverwalk. But we found a place that was right next to the river. That was just a beautiful.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you found it, right?
So I
while I was working.
Yeah, well, you went to meetings. So I but I do that anywhere. Like if I'm in a new city. And these days the Lyft or the Uber or the cab takes you to where you want to go. You find your room, put your bags down, and then you walk.
Yeah.
And what I do is I've always walked a block and then turn right, a block and turn right, block and turn right, block and turn right. And theoretically, I should come back to where I started from, and then I do it again, but I just go broader and wider, and to just mark the kind of.
Wait, did I tell you that's how my grandmother learned to drive? Well, that's how she ended up driving. My grandmother, Tessie, on my dad's side, got a driver's license late in life.
Grandma Tessie.
She could only make right turns. And eventually she just stopped driving. Anyway, sorry, it just reminded me of that.
Imagine driving in a. Well, I mean, it might work in. It would work in New York.
In New Jersey, you kind of can do that because there are jug handles. You know, you have to turn right to go left. So that would have served her. But yeah, she could really only turn right. Anyway, that's a total divergence.
Yeah.
But you're really good like that. And you kind of survey the city to find the best cafe and bar.
Yeah, I found the best bar for sure.
I think you did. And the food was good. We ate there 3 nights in a row. It's really nice, though, and I think people appreciate that when you're in a touristy city and people turn up. You know that you've provided a good service. Yeah, it was great.
So, turning back to you and your presentation. I mean, there were some highlights, and you're right. Bill's talk for me. That's what I went to, and yours was the other, and in a way, kind of a similar message.
Yeah.
A congruent message from both of those talks. I mean, his was not an historical conversation, but it was a kind of a State of the Union almost.
It really was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yours was I'm going back, and we're going into the archives together and the primary sources.
Yeah.
To relearn or rehear who we are and how on earth did we get here,
Can I just share a moment that was like a total rock star moment for me? Was getting to hang out a little bit with Franz Vermeulen, who we had met, but only briefly. When I had only, you've met him, many times, but I had only met him once I believe in Colorado back in 2015 or something.
That'll be right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And really didn't have much time to talk. And this time,
oh, you two geeked out.
I know. I got to share with him about my research, and then we had planned to meet again, and we didn't have a chance. Like I said, it's so busy, but we're planning a Zoom meeting, and I'm so excited because I think that there's a kindred spirit in research and archival work and tracing down source material, and it was amazing to hear. And again, I didn't get to go to. That I only got to go to 2 talks because of the meetings, and I'm looking forward to listening to the recordings. And of course, Franz and Linda Johnston's is one that's at the top of the list. And there was a mic drop moment apparently where Franz was talking about how Rus talks. There's some discrepancy about the substance, and if I'm not mistaken, George Demetriadis also pointed that out some time ago, didn't he? At another conference. Anyway, but. It was really, I found that several students were talking about that moment. It was like a light shining around me and angels singing, because it meant that people actually care about the validity of the materials from which they get their information and are interested in making sure that the medicines that are being delivered to people are delivered based on fact and not, God knows what.
I had a moment. I don't know if I've told you this. Maybe I have. But my moment listening to Franz was actually, I'm going to say, in 2007. And so what is that? That's 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was at that conference in Heidelberg. And he was talking, and it was an interesting conference with a lot of varied speakers. And his talk in the main hall, if I remember it right, I'm going to say it was not as well attended as, say, Sankran's talk. And, Sankran did a performance. It was just astonishing.
Yeah,
really,
that was in his... Yeah. He was levitating during those years. Pretty awesome.
And Franz did something very, very different. He said, and maybe I'm just making this up now, but there was a bit of an acknowledgement of, that was a really interesting talk. Now let's learn some facts. And it wasn't disrespectful in any way at all, but it was, I remember hearing for the first time that, well, actually, no, Rajan, you've got that part wrong, because capsicum is no longer classified as a solanaceae. And it was just like, oh, wait, oh, that's really interesting. And then there was another part of that talk where Vermeulen made reference to the crazy situation we somehow got into at the end of the 1800s, where the remedy that was chosen to treat tuberculosis in humans from a nosode perspective was tub bov,
yeah.
not tub human.
But that would make sense, because that would make it more of a similar
Well, it would
than
make
an
it similar.
isopathic intervention.
Yeah, and so I knew you were going to say that, but for me that was like, oh yeah, why don't we use basilinum? Why is basilinum so poorly understood? And tub bov is the dominant remedy that we feel like we know really clinically well.
Well, so that really, though, that ties into my talk, which is...
Yeah, but I want to finish up first.
I'm so sorry. I got all excited.
Down. I know you
You know how I get.
Yeah.
I've got message received.
So with respect, let me continue.
Yeah, I'll just keep drinking my coffee.
So...
What was that sound?
That's the sound of me going, oh, we don't have a decent proving of tuberculinum. And we certainly don't have a decent proving of basilinum.
Yeah.
And so I had the opportunity to do that. And that was the proving that I did in 2008 and then 2009.
And was it was tuberculinum bovinum? That was...
We did a proving of tub bov and then basilinum.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Is that what the research offices were? I know they're working on tuberculinum. Is it both?
No, we've finished the right. It only took 13 years.
Yeah.
But 14. And basilinum is the next cab off the rank.
Oh, wow. So it'll be really interesting. So this really intersects actually with some of the things I was talking about in my presentation.
Huh. All right, you may proceed.
Well, because it really speaks to the Pyrogenium sepsin argument.
I love it.
So
what's that?
Well, first I want to say, because as we were talking about what was this podcast going to be about, and you had said to me, oh, do a recap of your talk. And I said, well, basically I talked about my research before, but then I realized that actually my conference presentation, which was in effect a presentation of my paper, was very different because it was geared toward homeopaths.
Yeah.
And that means it's a pull back the curtain moment. So there's one thing to write for the historiography. There's one thing to be unbiased, to just document facts, to just, I was explaining the process, right? It's like you learn what they call the field. You learn the information that is laid out in the field. Then you have to add something to the conversation through previously unused primary source material, create a new argument, and defend that position. And so I had to find a way to do that would make sense that people would care about, who have written homeopathy off or who see it as, what did I call it last time? Something nuisance?
A peripheral nuisance.
A peripheral nuisance. And so what actually got my paper sort of acknowledged was this idea that homeopaths were actually legitimate scientists, and that Constantine Herring introduced 3 substances into the materia medica, or I should say it a different way, isolated and used medicinally 3 substances that were not used in that way, were not even understood to be capable of use in a particular way for more than 50 years in the standard scientific world. So that was a huge deal.
In other words, you know, and that to me is probably, that's an amazing moment where the next version of the textbook that emerges with the timeline of the history of medicine and the understanding of germ theory and microbiology and the development of all of that has now got to start somewhere else, and it involves a homeopath
I think. But what does it really take in the metaverse to get that to happen? Because I think my paper will need a butt ton of citations to make its way to scholarship, is my guess. So everybody start writing. I'm going to have to write a lot of papers and cite myself.
Well, that's exactly what
so that it comes up.
I expect you to be doing
straight
after this podcast.
Well, I've already started looking at, my PhD programs, because now I've gotten, so the process in my field is that there's a terminal master's then going on to write the thesis, the beyond, to write the secondary dissertation. Anyway, but so it was interesting though to think about taking what I had written for the standard historical documentation argument, and then say, well, but what do the homeopaths need to know?
Right.
And it was really fun to do. It took a little bit more work than I thought, because I sort of had planned, well, I will just share my findings, but I realized, like, wow, no, there is, if I have the opportunity to speak to people, I need to speak to people. I need to be able to, get some points across, right? So the first thing was, of course, it really feels good to know that one of our lineage had made scientific progress well ahead of the curve. It just speaks to a different way of thinking that we engage with. So that was cool. But then I was thinking about the consequences, right? Because there are inevitable consequences that come along with progress, and consequences can be good, bad, or neutral, right? But there's an outcome. And so as I sort of looked at Constantine Herring as a foil, he was a challenger to Hahnemann's philosophy from the get-go. And so what really happened, and I think this is sort of a big deal, and this is a conversation I wish I could have with people who don't want to think about historical activity and who just want to do it their way. Mm-hmm. It's like I never want to say to somebody, don't do you, because I believe that even in something that is the most, let's say, controversial, there's always going to be a nugget of truth. Always. There will always be something positive in any situation. That's what moves, the universal energies forward. Mm-hmm. I would love it if people who put their fingers in their ears and la 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 when I start talking because they don't want to change what they're doing, would actually hear some of the points that I think are important. And one of them is that I think we need to really understand what Hahnemann did, and it's not as hard as people think, because there was a lapse in teaching because of what happened in 19th century homeopathy and the decline based on practicing homeopathy in ways that were unrecognizable to the way that they were meant to be, put into play, that we wound up with a century of darkness, basically. Yep. And we had to rebuild. Like we talked about this earlier in podcast episodes about, gratitude for how people kept education going for a long time. And now here we are asked to do it again, right? Asked to now rebuild and to have a formalized educational process because we have an opportunity to work within the system in ways that actually could bring homeopathy back into a driver's seat as opposed to being in a sidecar.
And when you say, a period of darkness, you're talking from, let's say 1900 through to the 1980s or something like that.
Yeah. Mm. And what emerged was a lot of Kentian, post-Kentian homeopathy.
It's interesting that came out, isn't it?
Yep. And which is great, except that it misses something. And I think a lot of these incredible thinkers, especially those who are adding sort of the, what I would call spirituality to homeopathy, it's like everybody knows that there's a flavor of that sort of divine that goes along with homeopathy. It's you can't ignore that. You can choose to be almost a concrete materialist about homeopathy, except that that it's energy medicine. That there is a way in which this operates differently, right? Now, that being said, everybody takes their spin on what it means to recognize the divine in something. So what I tried to do in my talk was sort of acknowledge that, with Hahnemann's history, the ways in which he was able to bring forth information was a combination of, was scientific. But science in his time included magic. Everything from magic to medicine was in the same bucket. Poetry, just look at Goethe, read Goethe. Goethe on science is a wonderful book of essays, most of which are poems, or written in a form of prose.
Yep.
And some of the questions that were being asked, like Goethe's color theory or Newton, Isaac Newton. I mean, you look at all of these incredible thinkers, and then you have to see that over the course of time, the history of science sanitized all of that information, excluded what I'm going to refer to today as just as the divine, as a way to say it's the mystery that we can't quite define. So what has happened, I think, is that lots of incredible thinkers and healers are using the tools of homeopathy, and then the divine part becomes their special sauce. They do it in their way. And if they add in whatever their sort of practice is, because it's the language through which they can convey information. Now, Hahnemann was, Western Christian. Lots of people have added Eastern philosophy to it. I actually kind of like that, because it's a very different way. It's not adjacent, it's separate. So you can hear it in another way without changing it, right? Like I'll often use an analogy to yoga philosophy as a way to describe all the different steps that you go through in order to really get sort of potentized in homeopathy. The yoga analogy I use is, you start with asana, and it's more about the body, but that's about connecting the body to the breath, which is about connecting the breath to the meditative and sort of spiritual practice, and then you levitate. But people are thinking they enter into homeopathy, in a 3 steps to levitation kind of a mode. There are a lot of those shortcuts and bypasses. But
I totally get it. And I use a different analogy, but yeah.
What's your analogy?
Miles Davis.
I love it. Go, do it. Yeah, it's great. I've used a similar one in other ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to play jazz. You listen to great jazz exponents, and they didn't start with that, you know, and so they learned music theory.
Yeah.
They know music, and they do foundational music theory for one year, 10 years, probably 20 years, 30 years, and then they start riffing. You
could argue that some people just come into the world
knowing it.
There are
some exceptions, yeah.
And I think we could say that exists in homeopathy as well. But you can't teach that to everybody.
That's exactly it.
And that's one of the troubles with sort of guru-led education, I think, anyway. But maybe that's because I'm not a guru.
It's really interesting. I had a conversation the other day in class. Someone, we got onto that. Oh, it might have been, I think it was Grace. Just asked, what did you mean when you said this? And she was being, it was in the introduction to my textbook on case management. I actually said in all 3, and I said, yeah, that got me in a lot of trouble. But what she said was, why is it that, you explicitly say that you've tried to move homeopathy away, or homeopathy education away, from an emphasis on the teacher, the guru, and I gave some explanation, but actually the thing I should have said is Richard Pitt wrote a chapter in my book, and it's titled "If You See Hahnemann on the Road, Kill Him." In other words, that's not Buddhist saying.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful book. If you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. That's actually written by this Jewish guy. Oh, what's his name? Sheldon Kopp. Beautiful.
I don't know him.
It's extraordinary.
I thought you were going to say, what's his name? Jack Cornfield.
No. I believe the name is Sheldon Kopp. Wrote a couplet.
What era is he from?
80s. I'm going to say 80s.
Yeah, so that would. Sorry, we're totally now riffing on into. Both of us have have an interest in a past in the study of Buddhism.
My tea's clearly
philosophy.
kicking in.
Yeah.
So
good.
No, but it's that idea that you've got to find the authority within.
Yeah.
And it's that step on the shoulder of your teacher, and be welcome there. And if your teacher doesn't want you there, then go find another teacher, because and while there could be some development around devotional energy, I think there's no doubt about that. Don't turn that into that. That's not education.
Right. The inherent in the word discipline is disciple. Right.
Exactly.
So disciple is in discipline. It's a better way to say it.
But at some point, that student's got to leave, and that's the point of that statement about, if you see the Buddha on the road.
Well, from the Italian mother, I would say the student doesn't have to actually leave, but establish independence and their own agency to be able to contribute. And if you've got a healthy organism, like, like we try to produce within AHE and the foundation,
nice.
it means you don't have to leave, but you can assume your leadership position. And, that's...
And authority and the knowledge.
Exactly.
Anyway, I'm not sure how I got onto that. How did I get onto that?
We just went down a cul-de-sac. So I'm going to come back, because what we were talking about was going from the conversations with Franz Vermeulen, and then you were talking about tuberculinum, bovinum, and bacillinum.
Got it. That's okay. Well done.
And then I was saying about the arc of my talk and bringing that to the homeopaths to get people to really listen. And one of the things that I feel is important is, it's not a disciple worship honoring of Hahnemann, and yet it is in that Hahnemann, and I've found this through the hard knocks of research, that he really did figure it out. Like, he legit figured out a system of medicine that puts life into an organism that is otherwise losing life. That is the elixir of life. That is the philosopher's stone. That is, that's an alchemical process. It is medical alchemy, right?
And knowing and having heard you talk about that before, that's the Van Helmont.
Coming through a lineage of which Van Helmont was likely one of the pathways that Hahnemann had studied. And so what I've been trying to do is to help people to, and it's really been, I've been interested to learn this. And when I've learned it, I've wanted to share it. And that is that if we can be true to what Hahnemann figured out, when he says, follow me, but follow me well, he's earned that. He's earned the request for people to follow him well. And it's very interesting to look at how, without getting into all the weeds on it, basically Constantine Hering followed a path that led to, that got homeopathy very much wound up in the scientific evolutions of the 19th century, which was about reductionism and germ theory. And it continues to be a problem to today. What I was able to find through my research and explore in my talk was that Hering was very much interested in medical alchemy, but he followed a different path, and he followed the path of Paracelsus, who was ultimately interested in isopathy, which is cure by same as opposed to cure by similar, is like a magnet for reductionistic science, and would be, the groove was already laid for 19th century homeopaths to follow that. And there was such a lure to it because it was considered science. So you could be scientific, you could be modern, you could create facilities where there were laboratories, or as you would say, laboratories, and there was this isolation of pathogens and substances. And, I walked people through this idea from germ theory to bacteriology to pathology, right? And which leads to an emphasis on causation of disease based on the substance you can isolate. Constantine Hering really kicked this off in the scientific world, and his adjacency to, or his, immersion in homeopathy was problematic, because it created a division, right? And so he literally was a foil to Hahnemann. And through going through, letters from Hahnemann to Hering. Now, of course, Hahnemann dies in 1843. Hering lives to 1880. So there was plenty of time from when germ theory and all the bacteriology really kicked in, where, Hahnemann wasn't there to really give him hell. But he did actually write in the 6th edition of the Organon, the footnote to Aphorism 56, very specifically going up against Constantine Hering and his introduction of Sorinum, or what he then called Sorine. And he says, this is nothing but a calamitous result will happen. And so I think that this is really important, because Hahnemann says isopathy, it's not a bad thing, it's just a different thing. There are 3 types of medicine: allopathy, homeopathy, isopathy. Isopathy is different. it is not homeopathy. And he says, people will come to this thinking that homeopathy and isopathy are the same. They're going to get it through their misunderstanding of vaccination. Vaccination and inoculation, meaning smallpox, and the use of cowpox as a cure and a preventative. So the reason, and Hahnemann goes into great detail about this, the reason that the cowpox inoculation was so effective is that it was homeopathic. But it was homeopathic because it was a similar, not an exact. Now, this is the same thing that when you're talking about tuberculinum. So tuberculinum bovinum, that's why right away I jumped in and interrupted you. I couldn't help myself. You know that joke, knock, knock.
Who's there?
Impatient cow.
Impatient cow.
Moo! Anyway, that's what I used to say to my kids when they interrupted me. Impatient cow. Moo. But the reason that I couldn't hold back is because... I know, such a rando. I couldn't hold back because your example was really amazing, right? Because tuberculinum bovinum is a similar, bacillinum is an exact. Now, Hahnemann also goes on and he says, I'm not against the use of morbific products. In other words, nosotes are not bad, but you need a proving. And yes, you can find out some of the information from toxicology and clinical information, but you're not going to get everything, right? This is where aphorism 153 and aphorism 20 are about that very unique nugget of information that you can only get through a proving. It cannot be intellectualized. And that is what tells the story. This is where we get into the divine. Right? So if we want to really get into the divine understanding of homeopathy, it comes through the proving, because the proving is what I call redemptive suffering, right? Aphorism 20 is about the ways in which an otherwise healthy person suffers in service to others, right? Aphorism 20 says, I'm going to take time out of my nice, cushy life. I'm going to take a remedy and I'm going to get sick. And I'm going to do this because what happens to me will ultimately help someone else. And the hard work that goes into that, that's what I call redemptive suffering. That's what we give back, right? It's very, very different. And so if you bypass that, you can get decent results, but you don't get through the gate. You only get so far. Right? Now, if am I like going on a roll too much?
No, but I've got 284 questions.
Can I just give the link for anyone who might be listening? Anyone who has survived this far? First, Grandma Tessie, only make a right, then to Impatient Cow. Right? So where I ended up in my talk, the example that I used in my talk was about... So pulling all the threads together was that you reach the latter part of the 19th century and medicine is now fully in the hospital. Surgeries are happening. Anesthesia is widely used, which means you can keep people open for longer, which means there's a greater chance of infection. Yeah. And so there are all of these advances in medical science to ward off infection. One of them would be Listerism is the most widely known. He created the series of rituals, many of which are still done in operating theaters even today. And he created this poofer machine to spray carbolic acid through the operating theater and into the open cavity of a person getting a surgery as a way to stop infection. Anyway, post-surgical infections were really problematic. And you knew if you were in an operating theater, in a hospital room or recovery room, and you smelled dung or rotting flesh, you knew it was a problem because that smell was evidence of putrefaction, rotting flesh. And so there was like, okay, so that Lister and the germ theory guys are like, okay, well, we just have to kill all of the bugs, yeah? Then you've got the homeopaths who are operating according to similars who say, oh, well, if I smell this rotting flesh, then by way of analogy, by way of similarity, rotting flesh should produce the analog to this disease.
Or what
that
in
would
nature
come.
can create that smell.
Exactly. So rotten meat. So you get this biochemist called Patterson in England who takes a bag of rotten meat, puts it in the sun in July for a certain amount of time. There's like the whole recipe.
He's not the same Patterson as the Balnoser.
Do you know what? It's not, but it did cross my mind because I think the Balnoser is Paterson.
Paterson, got it.
But I'm going to check. And I thought about that even when I was giving my talk. I was thinking about that. Anyway,
See, I listen.
I know, which is remarkable.
Thank you.
Because you don't look at sometimes.
When I have my eyes closed, I'm resting and listening fully.
So
in the moment.
You're so zen. I love that about you. Anyway, so they say we're gonna make a remedy out of a rotting flesh substance, so rotten meat.
Yep.
And we're gonna potentize that, and that should be a remedy that is analogous to, curative of any of these sort of septic, problems. Genius, right? At the same time, you have the reductionists who want to prove the byproduct of sepsis. Okay, so I presented this conversation between Herring and Swan. Samuel Swan, homeopath from New York, he writes to Constantine Herring, and he says, "Dear doctor, have you ever potentized septic blood? And if so, can you send me some in the highest potency that you have?" And Herring writes back, and he says, "I haven't. All effects being different," and we're going to talk about that in just a sec. But he also said, "But I know a guy. There's a guy called Wormley in Chicago.
Everyone's got a guy.
Everybody's got a guy." He says, "Let the chemists have at it. I bet they can find an answer for you." And that tells us so much about the conversations that were being had in the making of medical knowledge in that part of the 19th century, right? So there are a couple problems in it. One is that, and this was a conversation that was being had from 1800 on up, where homeopaths were arguing with the reductionistic people to say, how do you know if the morbific material that you extract from whomever is exactly where it comes from? And one of the examples that is used, I think I got this out of Dudgeon, somebody said, there's an argument, and somebody says, well, we know that the blood in someone with measles carries the disease, but we know that if there is an eruption, with pus, that it's going to be in the pus of any sort of malignant outputs. Well, is it always going to be the same? I mean, it's kind of an interesting thought.
It's a really interesting thought,
right?
Yeah.
And so I think that,
in other words, it's the essence of reductionism, because it is trying to find the causative agent.
Right.
And with the microscopes and the technology they had at the time, it made sense that for Sorine, it was the pus.
Yep.
And for what's the name of the remedy?
Sepsin.
Sepsin. It was whatever they could get. But I think these days they would go even more refined.
You'd go into the blood.
Yeah.
Because what you know about sepsis is not about the output and byproduct of the disease.
Yeah.
It's blood poisoning.
Yeah.
Coming from a gal who had sepsis.
And isn't that so interesting? Because in that century, from a public health perspective, at the beginning of the century, diseases caused by the miasma,
Yep.
and by the end, with the cholera epidemics, no, it's not. It's caused by water,
right?
Infected water
that came from this pump.
That came from that pump.
Yep.
And
public health tracing, mechanisms.
Right.
Right. So, but let's just finish here for a second, right? Because if we stay at that point with Herring and Swan and Patterson, so there. Oh, did I lose my train?
No.
Because
you were.
What Hahnemann wrote to Herring, and he said, "Be mindful. If you were doing," and this was like in 1835, 1838, something like this. But he says to Herring, "Be mindful. If you are using products from an autopsy, you are getting the results of allopathic treatment. Don't rely, chemistry and anatomy and physiology," he says in Latin, "sit modus et rebus," everything in moderation.
Yeah.
Now, let's fast forward, because what you get out of the morbific expulsion of a septic eruption, right, the exudate, is is dead material. It's not the live material. The live material has moved into the bloodstream. So is that going to be homeopathic? Well, the only way you know is by a proving, and a comparative proving. I love what you're talking about with tuberculinum. Now, if we look at this, so one of the problems and one of the things that I brought up was, okay, well, there are arguments in the journals. I looked at one of the journals, the New York Homeopathic Medical Journal, 1909, I believe, so shortly thereafter. And they're saying, okay, you got pyrogenian and you've got sepsin. Well, in the Materia Medica, is so-and-so using this one or that one? And then somebody responds and says, well, they're basically the same. Well, no, they're not the same.
No, they're not.
They're not the same at all, but they're often used interchangeably.
Right. When you think about it, I mean, at that point, because I heard that point, I sort of drifted off, didn't drift off, but, I went into my own sort of horror corner. Because, imagine for a consumer of homeopathy, you go and buy some Waron product, they'll come in the nice similar blue tubes, and, you choose that one or that one, you're at the Whole Foods. And you've got no idea about the history of that and how that label got on there. And I don't mean from a manufacturing point of view, but I mean even before then, because the quality of the proving of gelsemium, where that original information came from, is not the same to the quality of the information of the proving of pyrogenium.
Right.
And so Swan was kind of an interesting guy.
Oh, he was so interesting.
But, it's like, so there's some, top topic for another day. There are some horrifically, appallingly bad proving examples that have got mushed up, messed up, and put into our beautiful textbooks that makes the reader think that all information is the same.
All the same. And in the digital age, even more so. You do a repertorization, and a remedy comes up, and if you don't go back to see, was that remedy proved appropriately? Who added that? Yeah. What's their bias?
Like that example, oregano. You know oregano?
Yeah.
What's the major symptom in it?
I can only think of something that I don't want to say.
Oh.
Because there's a problematic symptom in there for me. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, there is a problematic symptom because you need to know that the proving population, the sample, provings are great, right? No, because they used prepubescent girls from a monastery as the provers.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to have to read that immediately.
Right. And so, the symptom, whatever it is, the keynote, I've forgotten it now, is coming out of this particular sample. And it's one of 1,000 examples of questionable provings.
Well, totally. And if we talk about one of the other things that I brought up was herring and saurine, what he called saurine, which we now call sarinum. So first of all, I've seen all over the shop people saying that Hahnemann proved sarinum. He did not, and I have,
Newman says it, though. He's got it.
I know. But he also, one of the things we talked about is how he's made corrections over time. Yeah. And it could just have been, it's in Yasgur's dictionary. Yeah. I was looking up how does Yasgur define nosodes, and he says sarinum was proved by Hahnemann. And it's like, no. And it took me a while. Remember, I was trying to find this a couple of years ago, and I was going through all the primary source material I had on herring. Yeah. And it wasn't until it was actually hiding in an obvious place. It was in Dudgeon's. I got it out of Dudgeon's lectures, lecture 6 on isopathy. And then that opened the door and I could find the article that, Herring had written. So the first article he had written was in 1830. He was still in Suriname. And he acquired the pus from an otherwise healthy person. He called them rather large pustules, and it was a person who had handled some, quote, stuff from Germany.
What does stuff from Germany mean?
I have no idea. And
maybe it was snuff. Maybe it's a type?
I think it was stuff. Anyway, but carry that forward because then he produces some other experiments in the 1850s, late 1850s. So then the question that I had to pose to everybody was, same pus, different pus? How did he... What did he do with that pus?
You mean from the point of view of how's that remedy made?
How's that remedy made?
Yeah.
Are we still using that same pus? 1800s pus? Who was this person?
I reckon we need to interview... who should we interview? Foxman? Eric Foxman?
Oh, there's so many. I want to have a
Mike
panel. I want to have a panel. I need to know. I have all these questions. I want to know about all the animal milks. I mean, I've got, some of the old ones like Lacanitum, some of the new ones. So it's interesting, right? So you look at some of like Nancy Herrick's provings. Like when I teach that lecture, like that suite of lectures that I teach on critical thinking and in contemporary materia medica, and we go through the provings. And, you can talk about different proving methodologies and if people, however they're doing their provings. But one of the things that we do know about is where the substance material comes from in great detail with some of these newer provings. Like all those stories, I love the background stories Nancy Herrick tells about how, Melissa Assalam was able to get the wolf's milk and how they brought it down and how they got the elephant milk from this elephant that was in a zoo, and there was this one elephant that had a calf and wasn't interested in nursing. Then there was another elephant whose calf died who had all this milk, and there was like a whole thing going on. I mean, those are really interesting stories. And now I can imagine that we're working from source material. Those remedies probably aren't so widely used, although who knows. But are they all coming from the same source material? But it's at least contemporary. So you can go, okay, that's from the 90s or something.
Yeah.
But what about, the dog from the Lacanitum proving?
See, I didn't want to say it, but I thought it was I was going to say it's not a border collie.
It's a terrier.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's a terrier, and they said it was chosen because terriers had such a fondness for humans. Who was somebody's wife? Do you remember what I was researching the story? Anyway, but I think, I had mentioned during my talk about having a panel to really talk about this because, you've got so many like side conversations that are going on around homeopathy and people coming up with all their own methods and all this kind of stuff. When in reality, there's a sort of a core issue to discuss that's a really fascinating one. I mean, that's one thing. The second thing, and then I'm going to stop. But the second thing, and maybe this is a conversation for another day, is that one of the things that's always surprising to me is there are lots of ways that people sort of package homeopathic analysis. Like right now, the creation of systems is a really big deal and has been for a while, but probably since Sankaran's introduction of his systems and then Schulzen.
Sankaran,
yeah. They both kicked off at around the same time, right? But it's so interesting because there are all these ways in which Hahnemann gave us a system, and it's once you sort of understand it, it's not that hard. I mean, it's hard, right? But it's not that hard. It's just characteristic symptoms, knowing the difference between acute and chronic disease, understanding chronic diseases and how that influences the sort of evolution of a case and how it unravels over time. But I think, and maybe this is really a story for another day, but I think a lot of it has gotten wrapped up in the Similima mythology. Do you think?
I do. I really do.
Although that would not be the case for like polarity folks, because they're not looking for a Similima. I mean, they're acknowledging sort of a different thing.
Similar.
Yeah. Anyway, gosh, so much to discuss.
We haven't discussed the thing that I wanted you to discuss, the highlight of your talk.
What was that?
Describing twice what it was like to unwrap the book in Transylvania. That
you love this part. That was funny.
Well, because until living in Philadelphia, I've got no idea what a hoagie is.
Okay, so, all right, we'll end with this. Is that okay?
Yeah,
That's
sure.
hilarious because I don't, like sometimes when you deliver a talk, you're in the moment. Like I get in the zone and then like sometimes you'll say to me after I've given a lecture, you're like, wow, I really, that was great. Da, da, da. And I'm like, tell me about it. And you're like, you just did it. I have no recollection whatsoever. So I spent quite some time in Transylvania, so in Sibiu, Romania, where Hahnemann spent almost 2 years. It was like 18, 19 months.
Hermannstadt.
From 1777 to 1779. And he, what he was doing was he was cataloging the work of the Baron von Bruckenthal. And it's now Bruckenthal's castle and library, and so I was in the basement of the castle, in the restricted section. And I spent some time going through this like stack of folios that Hahnemann and a scribe created, which was basically like the card catalog, except that it's in a book of all of what the Baron von Bruckenthal had. And my goal was to look at every book that Hahnemann would have laid eyes on to see if I could trace this particular alchemical lineage that I had been postulating that was his influence. Anyway, so it was really funny because I had to like prove myself. I had to keep coming back. Like they would say, yeah, you're going to get in today. No, you're not going to get in. Oh, we're having a conference today. Come. And then they would ask me to speak for a little bit at a conference. I mean, it was like the craziest time. Anyway, then finally they let me in and they bring out this precious treasure that I had been waiting, like kneeling at the door to see. And they bring it out and it's wrapped in deli paper like a hoagie. And then they handed me...
Like a Philly cheesesteak?
Like a Philly... Not a cheesesteak, because that's hot. A cheesesteak would be like in foil, paper-lined foil.
All right.
But this would be like a cold sandwich, like a hoagie, like, wrapped in, like butcher paper. It was butcher paper.
Right.
Right? And then they gave
the
me...
co-op.
Right, and instead of giving me the white gloves, like, which they don't even really use much anymore, but like when you work with archival material, they usually you're wearing gloves to protect the oils from your hands, right? So usually what happens, you go into an archive and like there are all these rules. They take your bags, you hang them up in another room. You only bring pencils, right? You don't bring a pen. So you go in with your computer. Oh dear, there's Al's phone.
Yeah.
So you go in with your computer and your pencil and your paper, and now you bring your phone and your iPad, because generally what you're doing, especially if you don't have a lot of time in an archive, is you're taking photos of things. Like I would go, most of my time spent in the archive was, skimming things to see if it was information I needed. And then I've got this whole system of how I would document it, right? Taking pictures with my iPad, making notes on the screen. You put all these notes so you can find it again and reference it, blah, 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 right? So I'm sort of used to this, and everything goes on like a cradle, and you're wearing your white gloves.
That's right. Yeah, the thing.
They're right. You've got this, and they have different cradles for different, sized materials. Like it's a ritual effect. And, and you learn about this, like when you are studying, history, one of the things they teach you is like how not to be, kind of dumb in an archive, right? This is what you do. This is what you don't do. No food, no drink. You can't, no water, right? Think about it. You could like kill an ancient manuscript. So like I roll up in Transylvania and like they make me wait, and I'm waiting. I finally get in. They sit me down with all my stuff, including a coffee, right?
Yep.
At just a desk, and then they bring it out in deli paper. And then they handed me blue deli gloves. So I was like analyzing a sandwich. I mean, it was stunning.
Yeah, it was. And of course, why that is so extraordinary is because of the single deli glove phenomena.
The what?
The phenomena that you taught me about. Whenever you're in New York City and you look down, you always just see one deli glove. You never see two.
You never do. You always see one like random deli glove.
Random deli glove.
And you would think that like as a souvenir, I would have brought one blue glove home with me.
Well, you might have.
I didn't.
No, you didn't.
Mm-mm. I was too into it. But I was really shocked. And it was interesting because this is what happened, in Romania. There was, I don't know enough about the history of Romania, but they really didn't have, there was no money for maintaining this archive. So everything, and I make light of it just because I had this expectation of, I thought that it was going to have, stardust coming out of it. And it was literally, a stack of folios in deli paper. But do you remember they let you come in with me that one day? Mm-hmm. You came in for like a half a day. And do you remember the librarian, who was a very stern woman who sat and watched me the whole time that I was there? But she went into the back room, and you were there when I tried to stick my head in? Do you remember that?
Into the back room? Into
the back room, because I wanted to see sort of where everything was kept.
And what?
She gave me the eye. She was a woman of few words, if you recall. She didn't really say much. Right. She gave me the eye, and then she kind of, directed me out and back to my seat, and I had to sit politely.
I'm also reminded that I saw there was a map department.
Yeah.
and a whole lot of amazing maps, including some strange ones where whole countries had been systematically cut out of the map.
You spent some time when I was doing that work. You went through and were going through those maps. I have a few pictures of that.
Yeah. I wonder why, why is Moldova no longer in this map?
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
What fun. All right. I would say this is another one done.
Fantastic.
We probably talked much longer than we should have.
It's time to go. Thanks so much. Hey, folks, we'll see you next time.
We're going to do it again.
All right. Take care.
See you, everyone.
AHE is changing the face of homeopathy education by raising the bar through rigorous academics and unparalleled clinical training delivered live through the soulful use of cutting-edge technology. AHE prepares its students to become fully rounded homeopathic practitioners from anywhere in the world. Apply today and ask about the early enrollment discount at ahe.online.